Let me introduce Uma Narayanan, a postgraduate in HRD Psychology from University of Madras, India. She is currently managing leadership and professional development at a regional level in a multinational automotive company. Her areas of training delivery include personal development, communication, presentation, team building, learning and memory skills, and a lot of that. Her interest and pursuit is to bring about an applicable framework practice for leaders in the education and corporate sector in the journey of holistic development, thereby transforming teams and organizations. She is in the journey of holistic development herself. I think she's already there at the destination because when I first met her at the start of the session, I got a gist of her oozing confidence, the way she shook my hands. She was just so personified with her body language. You'll soon get a peek of that. And so who better to take us through the topic on integral leadership development, an emerging perspective of leadership. Thanks.
Thank you. Is this okay? I think I will echo Parag in saying that's too much. Good evening and welcome everybody, and if there are anybody on the line, then welcome as well. Okay. Integral leadership development. So I think everybody who starts speaking likes to set some context. So I think my way of setting context is take this as an invitation, take this as an exploration, which is why you'll find it in the topic, it's an exploration, and it's been my personal sharing that I'm going to do today. There are two ways in which I'm doing personal sharing. I think you would have heard that I'm doing research, and one of the areas that I'm doing research is integral leadership. And the other personal sharing is when I read this, when I explored this, and when I wanted to see how this will really help in big corporations where I'm working. Can I actually do that? And what will that look like? So I'm still in the learning curve, and I'm here to share bits and pieces that I've learned around the way, and it's my way of meaning making of what is integral leadership. You'll find some similarities in words that cross over from what you heard Parag share, and also you'll see it in different ways when you go back from here. You will see it in different words in your way of living. So it's an invitation, play around, test it, feel it. We don't have to reach consensus, and we can go from there, okay? So with that, I'd like to start with this. I usually start with this quote whenever I talk about integral leadership, and to me this is a very lovely way of thinking about this. It doesn't have to make mental meaning for us, but it will make meaning at some level for us. So what this says is the condition in which men live upon earth is the result of their state of consciousness. And to want to change the conditions without changing the underlying consciousness is vain chimera. So there is something that we are calling, which was actions, behaviors, but there is something beneath that. And when we look at that changing, it changes the whole flavor. So if you change the flavor of something, it changes the entire vessel of that. So that to me was interesting in what I call integral leadership development. So before we move on, I think there would be some paper in front of you, and I hope you have some pen. If you don't have, no problem. I'm just going to take 2 minutes to shift from the earlier topic to come back in here and do something that is personal for you. Okay? So fortunately this is not after lunch, so I hope that if I tell you to close your eyes, you wouldn't go to sleep. Okay? So with that, let me give you an invitation. If you don't have a pen, it's completely okay. It's still your mind and it will still have it with you. But if you have a pen, then you can use the paper in front of you. So 2-3 minutes, if you can just close your eyes, relax, move around or stretch a bit. You've been sitting for some time. So feel comfortable, close your eyes. And I'd like you to explore one question. I'd like you to explore the question in a way that I'll ask it now, and I'd like you to just stay with that question. And I'd like you to wait and see what comes out for yourself. So this is for you, yourself, and what comes out for you. It could come as a picture, it could come as a word, it could come as you know, a total image or a movie, I don't know. It could be anything for you, but just be open to whatever comes. So you don't have to figure it out, it will come, right? So as you think about this, I'd like you to feel comfortable, I'd like you to feel happy, harmonious, and ask this question, what do I truly aspire to be? what do I truly get inspired to be as a person? So what is that I truly aspire to be? And wait for whatever comes for you. And whatever comes for you, it could be a drawing, it could be a word. When it comes to you, feel free to write it in front of you. So you can wait for it and keep asking the question, what do I aspire to be? What is the true inspiration of the person I want to be? And anything can come. You don't have to wait for it, you don't have to struggle, it'll come. And if it doesn't come, you can leave the question open. It might come tonight, it might come tomorrow, it doesn't matter. But if it comes, feel free to write it in front of you in the paper. Or take a photograph in your mind and keep it in front of you. What do I want to truly aspire to be as a person? And whatever comes, it is there from you and it will remain with you. So whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes. And if it doesn't come now, that's okay. It'll come tonight, it'll come tomorrow, maybe when you're taking a bath, I don't know. But remember not to come out, okay? Right. So leave that aside for now. I'll come back to that in a minute, okay? So leave that image, picture, it's there. Or it's there in front of you, leave it, but I'll link that back to what I'm trying to do in terms of integral leadership development. So the time today, I'll set up context of why this integral. Is it another fad? Is it another fashion? Is it another new thing that we want to talk about? How much of leadership books is there? It's amazing. You just have to Google it or you have to do something about it. And there is even researchers who write sentences about how many thousands of books exist today or how many research articles exist today on leadership. So it's phenomenal, and I think I like the sentence that we heard previously, which is each one has their own path, and I think that's exactly true even to leadership. So I'm going to talk to you about integral approach to leadership development, give you a taste. I'll give you maybe one or two models that I have come across that I personally like and I can apply. I'll talk about what characteristics, so when you go back from here, at least you should remember some characteristics about integral leadership. Okay. This is another favorite quote of mine, and I think this is where also one of the integral leadership concepts come about. It talks to you about problems cannot be solved within the existing framework. So we need to have another operating system, so to say, or another way of thinking that will help us truly work around the problems that we have right now in this scale. It's almost like going to another floor and seeing what's the issue in the bottom floor and trying to make sense of it. So 3 things I'll tell you about the world. We heard some things in the earlier session, but you will also recognize this. If you ask anybody in the world, or if you talk about the problems of the world today, I think there's an interesting context today. The world is in a transition. Whether you or I change, the world is changing, and there are some indications both positively and negatively in the world today. So you'll find that more and more researchers and practitioners are talking about a newer way of being, a newer way of knowing, and how are we truly tapping and moving to face what are the issues today. I don't need to tell you about the economic crisis, I don't need to tell you about what's happening with the world at large, I don't have to tell you about the environmental crisis, but crisis is there and the context is that we need something new for it. So one of the ways in which we are talking about what is this new thing, I think is about redefining change, redefining growth, redefining success. And I think for me it's about redefining what we call organizations, growth and leadership. So what is leadership in the context today? What do leadership people do? And is it only at one level or is it something else that today leaders are about? And that's why it's called integral leadership development. It's about evolving yourself as a person, and thereby you evolve yourself as a leader. And the last one for me is, given the reality today, I think 80 to 90% of our life is spent on work. We go to some place, we work and we come back. Organizations, big scale, small scale, are a lot. And so we try to change in other sectors, but if we don't change in the organizations and corporates that we are there, then change would probably be faster if we change how we are working today. So that's why for me it's interesting. It can be integral education, it can be integral economics, but for me integral leadership was important because that helps us change organizations. So 3 things that I mentioned to you about for my interest, why integral leadership and why is it important today. It's about leaders as change engines. So if we want a team to change, if the manager brings some change, it helps the team change faster. If each individual in the team changes, it will force the team to change automatically. Holistic development as a human being. I think it was there in one of the quotes in the earlier slide as well. If you really talk about the human and its truest potential, we still are very divisive in the way we are looking at ourselves. We are a skill-based person, we have attitude, we have behavior, what's the holistic picture, and development at holistic level. And the last one is, my personal interest is, we need to talk about all of these things. You know, many of you all talked about spiritual elements, so it's not new here, but how do we bring this into mainstream? I think we have something like at home will be like this, at work it will be like this, and so how do we make this more holistic? So my interest is actually to look at this field and take it to mainstream corporate and really see, can we actually do this? Can we actually look at integral development, and can we actually move more harmonious, ethical, or whatever we call this as sustainable in the world today? So that's about why I believe it is very important to change. Many of you would already be familiar. I'm not doing something new, but I'm putting it in context, right? So this was an interesting study when I looked at leadership and I tried to see what are we trying to move as in leadership. It's a bit small, but you can actually see only the trends. I'm not going to talk to you about each theory, it's not a theory session, but I'm going to talk to you about the trends between them. So there were these earlier theories for people who read leadership, for people who read management. This might be familiar for you. At one point, leadership was like, you're born with it. It's with you and you're born with it. Can't do anything about it. Then it evolved to saying, no, actually it's about traits. And then they talked about personal qualities, and you know, if you have these 5 qualities, you become a better leader. And then they talked about just you changing, just you having those qualities doesn't mean you'll be effective as a leader. You need to consider the other person, you need to consider the situation, and then you change it. So slowly you'll find leadership has evolved, leadership development has evolved to include the self, the other, the situation. Until then you have actually the most often written, the most worked upon is what we call transformational leadership as a theory today. Moving from there, I think from the 1990s and 2000, I also found a lot of words, a lot of brands, a lot of different ways in which leadership was talked about. And one of the things in which leadership was talked about was this emerging around 1990s where you had level 5 leadership, authentic leadership, servant leadership. All of these things, to me, I bucket them as what I call leadership of the self. Look at myself as a person, what values I have, what ethics I have, and also leadership or follower or in service of the other. So leadership is no longer about me getting my way, but it's about in service of the other. And then slowly I found emerging trends of scale. So against Gandhiji's principles or ideology, globalization is there today. And so leadership suddenly became scale. If I'm sitting here, then I need to lead a team sitting in America. I need to lead a team sitting in South Africa. So then it became about scale, complexity, cross-cultural. I have enough complexity in India. I love to also deal with the Chinese and the Taiwanese and the Vietnamese, etc. And that's reality today. So then the next bucket was about scale, complexity, interconnectedness, etc. And the last bucket, which is what integral leadership falls under, is actually in leadership, it's coming around the 2000s. But even in integral spiritual leadership, integral leadership, you'll find transcendental leadership. These are things that were there as thinkers even more than 1 century back. But in leadership and literature, it probably appeared in the 2000s. And this is where I'm thinking that there is a call now in leadership that says it's not just your competencies, it's not just what you do as in effectiveness and measurement, but it's also probably who you are most deeper. And the third element is about depth or integrative, and that's actually where integral leadership fits today. You have to tell me how much shorter I have to make us. So I looked at two questions which I'm going to share with you today. What is an integral approach? All this is fine, but exactly what do you mean by integral approach? And the other one is, how do we provide a framework? So my interest is, if a leader wants to look at themselves and they want to change, can we actually give them a framework that is integral? And I found there's a lot of work on this, and I was very surprised to see organizations also do work on this. So it's not something new that we are talking, but I think it is very less today. I won't talk to you about this slide, but I'll ask you to pay attention to the blue words. So when I looked at what is integral approach and did some research, etc., there were a couple of things that what is integral approach. It's about truth, it's about wholeness. There's a lot of link between integrality and consciousness. Consciousness is a bigger term. If I open the Pandora's box, then we can keep talking about it. I won't do it. But a lot of integral and consciousness is a lot together. 4 words: individual, collective, interior, exterior. That's another way in which people looked at integral. And then we talked about integral as a stage of development. So it's a particular part in which you become integral. That was another way in which people talked about integral. And the last one was holistic and width and depth. So somewhere around this width, depth, consciousness, holistic stuck around with me, and I found that made intuitive sense for me as I looked at integral leadership. Integral leadership doesn't say, I am only saying this is integral, other theories don't say this. I think you'll find a lot of theories saying this. There's a lot of crossover between spiritual leadership and integral leadership. So I'm not here to talk the flag of integral leadership, but I find it makes intuitive sense for my own development. So it's holistic and it's also a stage. These were some frameworks, and I'll talk to you maybe about 2 frameworks that help you think about something. When you go back, you should have some framework to use, right? So when you look at the frameworks, I'll talk to you about this one framework. There's a saying in people who talk about integral that you cannot talk about integral without talking about Ken Wilber. If you Google, you'll see him. Ken Wilber is probably one of the proponents. Sri Aurobindo is one of the earlier proponents. If those of you know, Sri Aurobindo is based from India, Auroville, and Pondicherry. And he was one of the earlier integral pioneers in the field. But Ken Wilber is the one who probably talked about it a lot more, created a lot more framework, and he's the one who took the field, larger. So he tried to bring together different things and make meaning out of it as an integral framework. What we can take from Ken Wilber's model for me was a framework that helps us put things together. And he looked at four quadrants. He calls this the 4-quadrant model. And he looked at interior, exterior, individual, collective. Simply, I transferred it to leadership and probably talks about the self, the me, myself inside, what behavior I do outside, what competencies, what skills, what actions I do outside. Culture, which is the intersubjective, which means what happens in our team, what happens in relationships, what happens between people. And then the outer context, which is the system and the behavior. So if you look at change, if you look at development, you can't look at it only from one quadrant. You need to actually consider all the 4 quadrants when you look at change, which management theorists also say. I think where I look at integral leadership is, for me, the first quadrant change is also significant, where we probably don't look at the first quadrant enough. If you look at any self-help books today, they talk about a lot around practices, outside practices, and we haven't fully, I would say in my experience, in mainstream corporate, in mainstream development, we haven't talked about who you are as a person, what qualities you hold, and only when you come higher up in the leadership, they talk about, authentic leadership, etc. But we don't talk about interior enough as much as we talk about systems, processes, structure, culture. We talk about a lot in culture, but we don't talk about who we are and how if I sit in this room, what energy I bring into this room. If the 15 of us are here, do we even pay attention to what is the energy in the room? Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it friction? Is it flow? I don't think we pay attention to the interior enough as much as we pay to the exterior. Second model that you can use, and this is one of my favorite. This one talks about putting together an integral framework, and why I like this is it talks about 4 intelligences. So if you look at development of yourself, it's 4 areas. And they talk about physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. And you'll tell me this is there in everything. Yes, it's there in everything. But that's what makes it integral. I think integral is about all-inclusive, but there's one more thing, it's all aligned. So we separately probably do health, we separately probably do emotions, we separately probably do our thoughts, and we separately have God somewhere else. Integral to me is all inclusive, all aligned. And aligned is where I would call where's your center. So where is your center of gravity today? Which part of it is it in? And that to me is what is integral leadership. So 2 words and nothing else at the end of this talk would be all inclusive, all aligned. And nowhere that I have seen in some of the models here, they don't say you should do this alone to get spiritual intelligence. You should do only this to get emotional intelligence. Probably gives you just a way to think about it, and in your own living context, based on your own values, you need to figure out what that means. So even if you take it from an organization point of view, if I have to change something, I can't change only the physicals and expect a change in the emotions of my team members. I can't just do one thing and not do a holistic change. And if you start thinking about holistic change like that, I think you might start thinking about it differently. So that to me gave me power in my team. Awareness is something, mindfulness, awareness is a tool that everybody is familiar with, but I found that in this model and it was very nice. What I like about this model is the third one. They called this the 4-3-2-1 model. It was quite nice, and they talked about this as 2 things, ability and choice. I think we also talked about choice in the earlier session. I think it's about, you have all of them, you may have all the intelligence, you may have the abilities, what's the choice that you do? And that's why I like this model as well. It brings in a certain choice as to what you want your center of gravity to be and what do you want to live your life by. And the last one is ultimate integration and oneness. So when I spoke about this in a conference that I presented a paper, I thought I'm talking to an international audience. Yes, I had to take the flight, but I went in there and I thought, when I talk to an Indian group and I say spirituality, God, it's quite easy to talk, right? Because nobody's going to say I don't believe it. There are people, sorry, but nobody's going to say that I cannot get spirituality in some ways. But I was curious to find that even in the Western context, even in any other context, this integration to oneness, universality, universal forces, whatever name they gave it, people had that sense. But what we have probably, in my experience, what we have done is left that aside, probably not looked at how that can govern our life, and we probably live more, we are called mental beings, right? So one way is social animal, the other way is mental beings. So we are actually very mental. And I don't think we integrate the intuitive sense enough into us as much as we have our mental capacity developed. Everything has a place. The question is, how is it aligned? And that to me is why integral is special to me. And the last one that I wanted to mention, but I think it's already talked about in this forum, is telos. And that also gives you a good framework to develop. But I'm not going to talk about that one right now. So to me, these 2 models gave me a sense of there is this quadrants, there's internal, external, collective, individual. So if you look at collective change, it has to have with individual change, and just individual change without benefit of the collective also cannot sustain. And the second one was the 4-3-2-1 model that you can take by. So what are the characteristics? So when I looked at this, all this is fine, framework is good, it helps us understand. How can I get a sense? What is integral? Integral leadership is a holistic approach to leading oneself and others in a reflective, conscious, thoughtful and responsive way. Now, I don't know what that means for you, but you will find that it makes sense. And I don't think I have read, until I went and researched this area, I haven't read leadership like this. I've read leadership is influence. Leadership is getting to get others to do what you want them to do. Leadership is about, massive presence. Leadership is about summing up a huge mass of people to get to a direction. It's all that, and it's also this. And that to me gave me a missing link. That do we enough allow ourselves to think about us in a reflective way, conscious way? How much of our 80%, 90% of our work time do we have these things? And it's not there. So that to me gave me power to think about this. I want to talk to you the definition. I think the slides will be available somewhere so you can read that later on. But I like the second definition of unfolding of self to higher and deeper. If you ask me what that is, Uma, do you know that? Do you live that 100% of the time? I'll say no. But I think it's a journey. I don't think I can get it ever like that, and I think it evolves as much as I evolve. So today I'm conscious of this, next time I'll be conscious of something else, and I'll go through another one. My personal belief that I read one quote is, people behave or live to the highest level that they are aware of. And that was brilliant. Because the minute somebody is aware or it's in them, they will live it to that highest. And that gave me a little different way. So what are we aware of? What are we actually putting our attention to? And there was, if I can borrow a quote from a person sitting there back, where attention goes, energy flows. So for me, integral gave me a positive energy, a positive framework that talks about internal and external, and where energy, where attention goes, energy flows. I think that's a beautiful thing. Okay.
Going back to this previous slide, definition of this leadership. Do you think today amongst us there are people who would fit this definition?
Okay, do we have people who fit this definition?
Where they lead oneself and others in all those conditions effectively.
From what I've read of practitioner models and organizations that do this, I think they do it. I have a slide at the end that talks about Arvind Eye Hospital and the founder of it. I think you may not find these words, but I think people live that. People who have had, in my experience, people who have had consciously looking at themselves evolving, able to trust the collective process that comes, is naturally already on the journey. I think where they have is, do you do it 100% of the time? I think that's where people are still journeying. And to me, I think there was one research article that talked about integral as a worldview has probably come only very recently in the world, and probably 1% or 2% of the entire world is at that level, if they called integrality as a level. And I found that interesting, because I think we should reach a tipping point. I think we should start looking at what this means in our lives and what is this alignment. Okay? And when I looked at this, for me, alignment, or how I can do this, is I started looking at, for me, what is true, good and beautiful in everything that I do. What I do and what I don't do. I check for harmony. So if I check for harmony, if something is wrong and some disconnect is there between people in a conflict, I look for how I can set back the harmony. And there was another OD trainer who talked about this. She said friction and flow. Where you notice friction, that's probably something telling you something is not working there. And you'll find that when everything falls in place, there's a flow. So do you pay attention to frictions and flow in life? I think these are ways in which you start unfolding yourself and unfolding the other. And I have found that sometimes whatever I tried, something didn't happen for my team member. And sometimes everything worked around, somebody canceled something, something happened, and then I got that time for that team member. So it was very funny to see how these things work, right? Because if a systems approach comes, I don't think we're part of this world just as me, myself alone and my thoughts. I don't think I live like that. If you really look at how we are living, we're actually living in a big systems approach. What I do today energetically will influence this room. What this room does will influence me. I think that's what this is about. Okay, so words. Again, look at the blue, that will help you. So I looked at the first journey. People talked about your individual performer, then you become a leader, and then you become an integral leader. And you'll find at some of the things we looked at. So if you're looking at integral leadership and yourself, look at some of these words. One is that it's no longer just strategic, you actually look at transformation. It's no longer just part and whole, it's synergy between the whole. It's collaboration and harmony. It's long-term and holistic and sustainable. So when you start thinking these things and working out of these things in whatever framework, I think you're moving slowly to hopefully integral. It's about co-creation. I think that's a very powerful word. I've had this interaction sometimes at work where I've sat in a PPT, at work we always end up doing PPTs, presentations. So I sat there and one slide, I have no clue why, a group of people, 3 managers in the room, and we debated for it for like 20 minutes. Don't ask me why, nobody understood why, but we kept debating, not agreeing, disagreeing. It's co-creation, right? And we didn't know how to resolve this. At one point we said, let it go, leave it, we'll come back to that slide tomorrow. And then the next 5 slides we ran in 2 minutes because there was total agreement. Why I'm saying this is because I left that go. Next morning when we picked up missing link that was actually missing in that slide, and there was something in that point which was not complete. That's co-creation. It's telling you already that something is not formed enough that it cannot move forward. I'm not saying everything in life is going to be like that. I'm not saying every signal in life will give you like that, but I think it's about understanding its co-creation. Understanding that if I'm thinking now one thought and one word, it's probably something that you all are thinking right now. And we've got that very often, no? You think a word and somebody else says exactly the same word. It's collective. So for me, that's power of integral. You believe in co-creation, life looks different actually. Sustainable, you know the word, I'm not going to talk about that. Integrates individual and collective, what I said, and there's a true win-win-win. And the reason I'm saying win-win-win is, earlier we know win-win in a conflict is, I get my interest, you get your interest. But win-win-win, I think, is about what's the larger system and what's that telling us versus what we are doing. And many people today talk about win-win-win from, is it win for me, is it a win for you, and is it a win for the organization? Is it a win for me, is it a win for you, and is it a win for the environment? So I think we are talking about a third win, whatever that is. Right? Clearly this is an inside-out view of development, it's not an outside-in view of development. This is a beautiful word from a website, and you can read that website. It's called Conscious Leadership Forum, Conscious Leadership Forum. And they are a group of people who have got together to talk about conscious leadership. And they had interesting words for leadership. They talked about at-me leadership, which means they felt they are given the orders, they have been told to what to do, and they have to just execute below. At-me leadership. Then they said by-me leadership, which means I instigate, I create, I do. And I think for integral, they called it through me. They never said it was integral, but they called it through me leadership, and I found that very beautiful. So I think integral worldview is when you actually believe it's through you, that's something, and you are an instrument for something to happen at that time. So through me is another powerful word for me. Okay, so bringing it all together. So what is all this, all these words, pick up some of these things. For me, this is about the entire integral approach. I don't believe leadership is only for a few people in the organization. I believe leadership exists anywhere, in any place, in any team, by anybody at that time. And leadership can come from anybody that at that time is required to do. If you're open to that, you'll find that ideas, thinking, strategies can come from anywhere. And for me, that's a very powerful concept for leadership. Given that, I think truth, holistic view, all-inclusive, all-aligned, work and life, integrating work and life, for me this is powerful. I can't be a different person outside, can't try to be a different person inside. It's not about competencies. I might be more firmer, I might be more faster, I might drive results, I might be on time at work, but at home I'll probably be lazier and sitting at home and not following any time. Okay? That's not what we are talking about. It's about who we are fundamentally cannot shift between learning a new behavior of work, saying that's okay, it's accepted in corporate world, and then trying to live your life differently outside. I think that to me is very divisive. Spirituality at work, lot of articles exist today in spirituality at work, whole meaning of work. They say that, there was one quote in fact that said, people are craving for this kind of meaning in their lives. And we've attached a lot of meaning to work because it gives us something. But I think when we bring in a spiritual or being or whatever whole meaning at work, it takes a new different meaning. I haven't figured out that yet, but many people have figured it out. And recognizes the systems approach. This is another favorite of mine. We live in a system, we live in a bigger system, we live in a larger system. Whether that includes meteoroids or not, I don't know, but definitely we are doing systems approach. And last one is sustainable. Sustainability, when I read, had 4 things: personal, interpersonal, organizational, social, and ecological. When fundamentally you go more closer to your true aspiration, and if you align to what we call the inner guide, intuitive, whatever you call it, inner guide, true, good, beautiful, the spark in your life, essentially that is positive in life. And when we live from that, it's sustainable in itself. So it could take the form of non-violence, it could take the form of whatever, but essentially that connection within ourselves is probably lesser today at work. It may happen in our lives, we personally believe in it, but I've often find that, people are spiritual beings or people believe in spirituality, but they don't talk about it outside. So, I don't know. So that's my explorations with this emerging perspective. As I mentioned, I'll end up with 3 things and then we can open questions. So this was a snapshot that I picked up, and this was by a person who's running what they call integral studies, and they were asking, what is your perspectives on the field of integral studies? So this is by people who do studies in this area, have institutes on integral studies, and this is probably more based on Sri Aurobindo's work. And I'll just point out to the last sentence perhaps, that to be a true leader of others, one must learn how to lead oneself, how to harmonize the different parts of one, how to resolve the internal discord with oneself, And this is what integral study addresses. And I found that very, very intuitive for myself. This is another story of an organization trying to do this at the collective level. They have a true vision at the collective level. You can read up a lot about this hospital. People who have interviewed talked about the culture at this place and what they stood for. And you don't find the word integral here, but you find its essence here. So a couple of words is we strive to forget our limitations and work with the direction of the divine will, which means whatever that had, this was done by the employees in the organization, these were their words. So they said, we just do our work, there's a will, and we just do our work. With great confidence that comes the faith and realization that we're all part of a spiritual capacity or spiritual power. And so the question I have is, all inclusive, have we included every part of us and all aligned? So where is our center of gravity? And do we recognize that there is an inner guide, there is something that will tell us and keep moving us in some direction? Do we often leave that away, or do we follow that? And we don't know that enough, because our mental being will cloud it immediately. You get those intuitions and pop-ups, and immediately mentally we'll knock it off. But who knows? How do we try that? This is a project. You can again read this. I think it's an ongoing project by somebody who writes a lot on integral leadership, and they're doing something called a 100-book project. To me, these things just told me people are talking about it. People are trying to figure this one out. There are a lot of practitioners who have something like a 52-week-long program on integral leadership. So it's there in the air, but I think it's very limited in percentage. So with that, I think my end statement is, this is an exploration. I believe sit with this, look back at your own pictures and whatever you had in your mind. My invitation is for you to keep those pictures in your mind or in your heart for some time, and see what happens. Okay. Thank you.
So we are running out of time, so I have got some online questions. So I am going to pose those questions to you, and after that session the audience over here can talk offline with the speaker, and then their questions are getting clarified.
Okay.
So this is a question from Lakshman Pillai. This is on the evolution of leadership what we have got. How come spiritual conscious are pushed in the trend beyond 2000? Is it something new, or we just rediscover the leadership qualities existed even before 1970s?
I think the answer is there in the question itself, to be honest. Okay. I think what I mentioned here was emerging literature on leadership on these areas. I don't think any of those fields failed to exist before this. You have integral theorists who are probably a century years ago. I think spirituality exists in many of our oldest civilizations. So I don't think it's about that. I think it's about it coming out as a model in leadership. That's probably more written about, spoken about, and experimented from 1990s onwards.
Okay. And he has thanked you, and he has mentioned that your delivery is brilliant. Okay. Can you throw some light into how corporates in India are embracing leadership?
Okay. I'll probably invite that question for some other people who also work on Indian corporates here with this work. I think there are some communities and groups that work on it. People may not call it integral, but there are people who work on this in organizations. Arvind Eye Hospital is one example. They don't maybe use the word integral, but they have the spirit in it. I think it's not about the labeling. I'm not a personal favorite of labels. I'm a personal favorite of, does it have all the components, and are we truly going more deeper as a person? And you'll find that in many Indian organizations today. They may not tom-tom it, they may not talk about it, but I think it exists. And if Arul, you have anything to...
Thank you very much.
We'll have maybe two questions from the audience. Have any questions? To those who have not, maybe you. Okay.
Those who have not. Okay. He's trying to facilitate this for others who are silent. So.
Okay. So it's a good presentation. It's impressive. But I have two questions. So anyone you can pick up, or if you can answer two questions, that will be fine.
I'll try.
The first stage I see in your presentation, you have mentioned about Aurobindo consciousness. So Aurobindo talks about integral yoga. You may be knowing that. And when he talks about integral yoga, he embraces 7 stages of consciousness. Mm-hmm. When you see that, when you assess 7 stages of consciousness, where you want to put your integral leadership, in which stages of consciousness? In other words, how you are relating that stages of consciousness to the integral yoga. That's the first question. Second question, as I see, on the one hand, you said about integral leadership on the organization side, which is achievable. It's not impossible, right? You said that that can be achievable. It's like empirical fact. I can see from a higher education perspective. Somebody, if he or she tries with his or her best skill and intelligence, may follow you, like whatever you said, let's say, so then he or she may get it. It's an empirical perspective. On the other hand, when you said that it's all inclusive, that is a really abstract concept which tells about a metaphysical perspective. On the one hand, you are pitching at empirical perspective, which is achievable, which is verifiable in the form of observational data. On the other hand, that's an abstract concept or a metaphysical concept which is not achievable. So where do you stand actually?
So you can answer that yourself from what you're saying. I'll take the second one because it's more closer in my memory right now. I think it's both. If you take the quadrant, if I can answer the question from the quadrants, okay. Many people were asking me, really you want to do research in integral leadership, which is very soft and it's about consciousness. How can you talk about consciousness like this? And I realized that you talk about a very metaphysical thing from a lens of a mental thing. We are mental beings in some ways, and the way we are trying to understand these theories and these models, even without these models, integrality exists. But we are trying to use these models to learn. So you will find me actually gravitating between these two because that's been my personal pursuit right now. It's something intuitive. How do I take it out? How do I get people to think about it? So you'll find me actually addressing both because it's both possible. And to me, metaphysical is not something different from its observation outside. I think it has to be together. And if you look at the air today here, people can see the air conditioner in the air, or people can actually face or sense the consciousness. But if you ask me exactly explain where that consciousness is, I can't. But can I deny that consciousness exists in who we are as a being? Yes. So there is definitely, in my opinion, I don't know if I'm directly answering it, but in my opinion, both are one and the same. You either view it from the empirical side or you view it from the... So as a human being, we need that sensing. We have the capacity, we have the inherent potential, but I don't think we're sensing it enough. So we're trying to understand it from the empirical side. At the same time, we're trying to experience it from the metaphysical side. Because I can't yet talk about metaphysical that way from an empirical side. That's one thing, right? I have a probably more experienced person in the room, so I'll have to keep looking at that person there. Okay. The other one is, you said about Sri Aurobindo and integral yoga. I'd like to take that offline. It will take some time. One of the models of telos that was there earlier is actually based on Sri Aurobindo's model. It talked about the instrumental layer and then what is the deeper self and the higher self. Sri Aurobindo talked about even higher than that, but I'm not relating it there at this point. For me, if you link some of these things of physical, vital, mental and spiritual, it's probably the spiritual is binned among all the levels that he talked about. I'm not talking about the planes of consciousness, I'm talking about just the minds and the levels that he talked about. So in his higher mind and in his higher this thing and deeper self, which is a psychic, in both of them today we're just binning them together and calling it spiritual. So we're not taking fully all his levels because I don't think we've even reached at a particular level at this point.
There's a small conflict which has been picking me
from
right from the start onwards. So I was only 50% concentrating. So I
understand.
I just put across the challenge. Then it's up to you, right? See, expanding consciousness is a spiritual path. Aurobindo, Shankara, whatever, right? So expanding consciousness will take us to higher levels of spirituality, consciousness. That will take us to integrity and integral humanism. Organizations run business. They put money, they take money out of it, which is based on competition. Competition is divisive.
Exactly.
Right. So they are extremely opposite poles. If Shankara or Buddha is going to run a business, not even a single day they can survive. Right. So how do we? So two extreme poles. Right. So that's my question. Simple.
Beautiful. I'll answer it in two ways, and I think we're over time. So let me try this. There are two ways of growth, which I've read in the telos site. Scaling and evolving. Organizations today do scaling, more of. more of something, growth of something, expansion of something. Evolving is changing the fundamental nature of how you're working, changing the fundamental belief system of how you're doing work. And today it's written, it's clearly there that the financial system knocked down, the environmental system knocked down, clearly says that the way we're doing business today is not helping us. So to me this is a bridge. To me this is about figuring out how this can work. And there are companies, I can share offline if you want, when I read about companies that talk about this, they do that. Aravind Eye Hospital is profitable. Social business is an attempt to do that. How do you bring societal concerns into a business model? There are endeavors today already happening about how do you do eco-friendly business. They are successful, they are also ecological. So how do they do that? In your mind. True. And I'm not here to debate that. Okay. Sure.
Okay.
If I can encourage you, I think it's a conversation. If I can encourage you, I think the impossibility can be possible is one. I feel people are trying to bridge it, but unless we shift internally, I don't think that shift can happen outside. And please read Aravind Eye Hospital. I'm seriously asking you. They've somehow nailed it to be collective, to be conscious, and be successful. Figure it out.
Uma, this is a comment from my side. Please don't mistake if I make a mistake here. Normally I need to watch a movie, English movie especially, 3 or 4 times. After 4th time I will understand, especially the movie called Matrix and all. Okay.
True.
So I believe I need to listen to your, I have to go back and listen to your video at least 3 or 4 times because too much content in too less time. So this time is not sufficient for this topic to be covered in half an hour. So I need 3 more views of the video.
Feedback taken.
Yeah, and then we will ask questions.
No, I think Uma. Actually, that is complimented you because you've given, it's a very, complex, interesting topic, and you just given a handle to us. And I think this session has enabled us to go back and think on this because immediately when you put this definition of integrity, the person who came to my mind was Sukumar actually. So those who know Sukumar, I think is a good example for an integral leader because he is reflective himself and also he's reflective on other things. So I think both intellectuals is well developed and I could relate to Sukumar and then a lot of trying to. So I think if you go back and then get some person to and then put it thing, yeah, correct. So that shows the kind of compliment. No, it's
No, it's okay. It can be any which way. I will definitely take it.
Watch it again and again and not be tired of it.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So let us.
Irrespective of the style, something would have clicked. And if nothing else, the image you got in the beginning is probably worth everything that you spent here. That's the experience metaphysical part. So trust in what you would have heard. I may have been a messenger. I don't think I have the intelligence to figure this one out yet. It's probably something that's being given to me. I didn't choose the field has chosen me. So thank you very much. Which one? No, we can debate this mentally, but I'd like to leave it in a good space, so just figure it out.
So let us first thank Uma for excellent insights on this thing.